Beaming to your device directly from somewhere in the new Southern California Republic wasteland, it's the Hollywood Horror Nerds, your number one source for news, speculation, and discussion exclusively for Universal Studios Hollywood's Halloween Horror Nights. And now to your host, Undead Ed, and the latest escapee from Vault 666, Alvaro MacLane.
All right, welcome back to the Hollywood Horror Nerd, your number one horror nerd podcast. I think we're the only horror nerd podcast out there. Is that correct?
Always and forever.
And we're coming to you live from the Wasteland this time. It's a new environment for us, and it's also a little bit of a new format. So just to keep you company on these cold, lonely, cold spring nights we're having here in Southern California, we thought we would come and do a bit of a debate this time. So instead of giving you the usual news, the usual reviews, we have a bit of a topic that we're going to discuss. Maybe we'll come down different sides, maybe we won't. We're going to explore it a little bit. And we thought it would be fun to have a spirited fireside debate. So let's clink in. So tonight's topic is whether or not we believe a maze at Horror Nights has to be scary to be good. Alvaro, where'd you come down?
I think it depends.
It really is staking out a claim here.
It depends if the story is still good without the need for it to be unnecessarily scary.
Interesting. So do you have an example of something you would say this is a good story that wasn't scary at Horror Nights?
I would say what comes to mind to me is the Weekend's Maze. It wasn't scary per se.
Do you think it was trying to be scary?
It felt like it was trying to tell a story. And
it was trying to. Could you follow the story?
No, I could not.
Something about plastic surgery is bad for you, I think was the message.
Yeah, the message was more or less of be yourself, I feel like.
Don't be the Weekend, because his life is hell, apparently.
No, I think the moral was like, don't overdo it, or something of that nature.
Okay. So if you think a maze is telling a compelling story, even if it doesn't scare you, so you're really in these mazes for the story experience.
That's where we get the part
now it's
where
getting dicey.
Yeah.
Well, let me stake out my own claim. I'm going to say I don't think so, because I think back to mazes such as the Ghostbusters maze. That is one that stands out as this is not even really trying to be scary. There's a few jump scares, but the jump scares by like Bill Murray, so it's not scary.
Yeah.
And I still really enjoyed that maze. I really enjoyed the experience, and I can think of a few properties like Fallout, which I think we'll get to. We'll be able to end the debate. But I can think of other properties that would be really fun to see at Horror Nights that aren't really in that horror genre so much, that might have some horror elements, and I think they could be a really fun, effective maze. So when I think of what do I want in a maze, I feel like I want to step into another world for a while and be totally immersed in that environment. And the jump scares are always part of it, but I feel like part of the challenge of even making a scary maze is if you've been going to Horror Nights for as long as we have, it becomes harder and harder to scare you.
Yes.
Because you start to learn all our tricks. You understand, at this point I'm at a point where I can walk through a maze and I can call out almost every scare before it happens, just based on I can see the hole in the wall here, I can see a door here, I can see that bit of wall looks different, someone's going to come out from under it. So it becomes harder and harder to scare me. So I think if my criteria was it has to be scary to be an effective maze, I would think no maze is effective.
No, the thing is, yeah, the more times you go, you can easily call it out. I definitely have seen it where you definitely can, if you're walking along the walkway, you can see the bend and coming up, and you're like, okay, someone's gonna come out from that bend, or something's gonna happen, and they're gonna try to scare you. So definitely, I agree to your point that yeah, it's getting harder and harder to scare us. So the fact that if they can still tell a compelling story, in my mind, no, it doesn't have to be scary. However, for those new people who haven't come, or this is perhaps their first time, and they see a maze that's does not have jump scares, they might think it's not that impressive.
You had two interesting points there, and I want to take them both in turn. Your first about I want to have an effective story told in the maze. I'd like to explore that a bit more. That's a really interesting perspective for me. Because for me, the best story of the maze, if you remember back to we reviewed the attractions at Universal. And what stood out to me was something like Jurassic Park, or Jurassic World now. The story is just you're on a ride at a theme park and it goes awry just like the ride does. And you can think of something like that, and that was an effective story for me, but I also enjoyed something like Harry Potter, where the story is just much. I don't understand why I'm there, I don't understand why it's happening. I just enjoy being in that world, and it has such a strong sense of place. And that's how I feel about the maze as well. A lot of these mazes, I feel like they want to have a story, and it doesn't come across. Remember last year, Chucky was supposed to be the story of Chucky's killing the influencers. Didn't come across. I didn't care.
Yeah.
So you mentioned The Weeknd. Can you think of other examples where you thought, wow, this is a great story I got from a maze, and how that maze told that story?
Not per se, but what I can really think about the what you said about being immersed in the story in a way, the immersion factor was what really like sinks it in for me. Was when we went through, I believe it was the latest. What was that horror movie about the two girls that get possessed?
The Exorcist.
The Exorcist Believer. Yes. Do you remember when we were walking through and we could smell being in the barn?
Yes.
And then in the other maze
that was a big smell-o-vision.
And then in the other maze, we could smell being in that butcher shop. Everything was about all the senses.
Monsters of Latin America.
Yes.
Butcher shop.
Monsters of Latin America. Like that kind of idea, or the full-on immersion. I didn't need the jump scare. The jump scare was just the cherry on the top, essentially.
Okay. It's interesting you're talking about the immersion in the stories. What it brings to mind for me is kind of when I was first growing up to be like a little bit more of a teenager, getting a little older. What really entranced me about theme parks, particularly Disneyland, was really the standout, was it's such a unique way of telling a story that you can't do any other place, where it can put you in a world. You think of Disneyland, you think of you're in Adventureland, you go on the Jungle Cruise. And if that was just a film, it's not an interesting film. But as a ride experience, the story it's telling and making you a part of that story is something that can never be replicated. And that really kind of got me interested in the theme park world a little more, which eventually led to this podcast. But it's also, I don't know if I think about that in terms of horror nights so much, because I usually think of it more as I'm watching a horror movie more so than I am experiencing or I'm participating in it.
See, I would prefer it if we were an active participant in a way, just to get you that extra level of into the next level of immersion. Instead of being a sideline character who is observing it and watching this movie play out in front of you, no, you are now an active participant. And just like the participants in the horror movie may die, not to say that I want us to die for real, but it's just the idea of that now someone could be actively like going for you as opposed to just a quick jump scare.
What I remember on that point was the Monsters Unmasked maze last year, where you were in the catacombs and you walk into the secret underground kind of nightclub they have, and you can see the stage show of one of the monsters murdering. I think it was Mr. Hyde was murdering a woman on stage. And that was very immersive in the sense that the audience is seeing something within the context of the maze, but also you are part of that audience seeing it as well. I really enjoyed that. But it's something that I don't think they're able to bring across too often. I can think of maybe the Exterminator's maze last year, where they're exterminating the human pests, and you are one of those human pests that are coming at you, with human spray and such. That was a bit of a goof. Can you think of anything else that's kind of that world that draws the audience in and makes them an active participant in the horror?
Let me see. I think the best I can think of is when you go through the walkways and there's like hanging bodies.
The stuffing face.
The stuffing face. Yeah, that's where you can get like a bit into it, the story of having to, as being like one of the victims that needs to navigate out, and you have to push the bodies out the way to get out. That's the best I can think of for now. Just because it's not something that they're focusing on. They're not focusing on making you a participant. They're focusing on you watching something happen, and a jump scare happens in between you and each scene that you're walking to.
But I think the point you're trying to get at is if you're more immersed in the story and you feel like you're part of whatever's happening, the jump scare would then be more scary because it might simulate that danger more than if you're just passively observing. Monster pops out, passively observing. Is that what you're trying to get at?
I think so. I think that's what I'm getting at. I think the closest one, perhaps, that I can think of was The Last of Us, where you can hear the story in the background kind of being told, and it feels like you're walking through their footsteps in a way.
I enjoyed that too. It felt like you were the character in the game.
Exactly.
The way that a monster, not really a monster, but the raider would like pop out from behind a wall, and he would raise his weapon at you, and it would simulate gunshot sounds, and it would flash as if you were now firing back at him in the game world. That was really immersive in a way that I don't think I've ever seen at Horror Nights before.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I enjoyed was when they do that. So the fact that the story is being told in the mics around you and everything, and you're being part of it and just walking through their footsteps, that's more immersion. It makes you forget that it's a maze, perhaps, and it helps you be more into it. And yeah, like you said, the scares will be more effective this way.
Now, the second point you made in your initial spiel there was about new guests coming to Horror Nights, and that's something I actually agree with, where I can say as myself, as a bit of a jaded veteran, it's become very hard to scare me. It's not something I really evaluate the mazes on or blame them anymore for, but I could see how if you're someone who doesn't go often, or if you're going for the first time, you do expect to be scared at the Halloween horror event. It's in the name. If you go through a maze like Ghostbusters, especially if you're not really a fan of the property, if you're just a fan of horror in general, if you have no connection to Ghostbusters, you're not going to be thrilled with that experience.
Yeah. One of the things that I enjoyed in the beginning was the scare zones, where they would actively chase you down.
They become a lot more passive.
Yeah, they used to follow you. Even when I went with one of my friends, she was horrified.
Yeah, and they would go after you more.
They would go after you more, and she tried to escape to a restaurant. Guess what they did?
They came in.
They came in with you. That's what I loved about it. You became one with the story, and it felt more real. I'm sure for her, it was absolutely terrifying. For me, as a participant that could see it, I was laughing myself silly.
Yeah, that's always fun when you see the scared one. That also just might be another byproduct of the fact that we've gone so much, and it's harder for us to be scared. The characters will not target you if they can kind of see this is not going to be a good mark. So we may personally just not be experienced that as much as we used to.
Oh, so you're saying it could be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It might be a perception thing here
in
terms of the scare zones.
Yeah.
We have talked about before how the scare zones have just become a smaller and smaller part of the event. It feels every year.
Well, it could also be, like I said, a self-fulfilling prophecy where we say, oh, I feel like I can see it coming. I'm not going to really be scared. We go through it. We don't really experience it like, I told you.
Yeah, I can remember the first year we went. I think maybe the first maze. Actually, no, I'm sorry. This wasn't the first year. It was the second year I went with my friend, not Alvaro, MacLane, a different friend. But the first maze we did that year was Insidious, The Last Key. And I've never seen a single Insidious movie. I'm not that interested in that franchise. But I still very much enjoyed the maze just because of the horror element. I remember sitting in front of it. We were the first ones in line for it before it opened that day. And we got to really spend time looking at the facade and hearing the sounds coming out of it and that horror and the screaming. And that really built it up in my mind. I was actually afraid back then, even going into a maze. I always was. And that fear really was what propelled that experience, even though I had no connection to the franchise. No, that had not been a scary maze, but I'd been going for like a comedy maze with a franchise I don't care about. I don't think it would have been effective. I don't think I would have enjoyed it at all. I would have felt like I was ripped off. I was like, what was the point? I came to Horror Nights. It wasn't scary. So I do see how that is a complaint for especially newer attendees.
Yeah, so I can see it from Universal's perspective of trying to keep that balance of veteran people coming in versus the new people coming in. And how do you keep that balance of making it scary for the new people, but also how do you make it intriguing for the veterans who can say, like, I know it's coming around the bend. I can see this character a mile away. How do you keep them engaged?
Again, but I'm trying to think of examples of a maze that wasn't scary, and that was the reason I didn't like it. And I can't think of any. I can think of Killer Clowns was not a particularly scary maze. And the first year they had it, I loved Killer Clowns because that's a great campy horror movie. I haven't seen it. We highly recommend Killer Clowns from Outer Space. And the maze is such a great recreation of it. But again, because I have that tie to the franchise, maybe that's what's drawing me in. But at the same time, I think anyone can go through that maze, not knowing the movie, and you would enjoy the camp of that world and kind of the wackiness of it all. The scary kind of wackiness of, these giant clowns don't even look like clowns. These grotesque clowns coming at these people and doing just bizarre things to them. So I'm not sure if I would say this would be, because it's not scary, people can't enjoy it. I think of something like Exterminators, which I'm hoping becomes a full maze this year. It's another one that's it's a little goofy, it's a little campy, it's a little light on the scares, but again, I think anyone could enjoy it just because I think that premise is fun. And if you can let yourself go and enjoy a little camp, I think you would have fun with it.
Yeah, and the thing about Exterminator is that they still have areas where you become an active participant where they actually spray you with that human spray like you were mentioning earlier. So those kind of things where you don't see it coming, the rules are, for the most part, is they can't touch you. The fact that they quote unquote touch you with the water just adds an extra element of, oh, I did not expect that.
Yeah. And then Exterminators is very effective in drawing you into a participant in the maze, because you feel like you are one of the people these bug exterminators are coming after.
Exactly. So, to what I was saying, I don't think it needs to be scary to be effective. However, for the new crowd, definitely have to have a good amount of a balance of jump scare mazes and non-jump scare mazes.
I think if you're going to not go for a scary maze, it needs to have some other plus. Because if you think of a maze that's trying to be scary and it isn't, that's a bad maze.
Yeah.
The mazes that are trying to be a camp maze or have some other element that's fun and creative, that I think can be effective even if it's light on the scares. You think of something like an infamous one that I've done, I don't know if you were there that year, the Ash vs. the Evil Dead maze is rather poorly thought of in the community, and it's cited for not being a scary maze. Now, if you watch that show, which I love that show, that's one of my favorite TV shows of all time, it's not really scary. It's more action. It's action in a horror setting, because at the point of the show, Ash is so old, he's so over the hill, he's so done with it all, he's never afraid of a deadite. He's just there to kick ass and chew bubblegum, but he's all out of bubblegum. And the maze does not really get that across. It doesn't have that fun element. It's just these scary deadites coming at you, and the actors were wearing these Bruce Campbell masks that were not even a good resemblance. It was clearly a plastic mask they were wearing, so it just wasn't effective trying to be scary. It wasn't, and that's kind of a failure of a maze.
Yeah, you don't want to... We all understand that there's people behind these masks, but you want the disguise to be good.
I will say in general, I much prefer it when they cast someone who either looks the part, even if they don't put them in a big rubber mask resembling an actor. It's much better to just have the face of whoever it is and the costume. You get, this is supposed to be Ash Williams, or this is supposed to be Joel and Ellie. We can figure it out.
Yeah. The best I can think of right now is, do you remember back when they were having the anniversary tours, and I mistakenly said a couple episodes ago, is that the real Doc Brown?
That was Christopher Lloyd, yeah.
Is that Christopher Lloyd? And you were like, no, that's just an actor. I was like, that's a very effective actor
yes,
that looks so close to Christopher Lloyd. I mistook it. So if they can get something like that, it would definitely increase the level of effectiveness.
Now, if we could touch on just a few franchises that I won't even call them rumors, just that kind of in the ether people have been discussing, kind of prompted me to think, hey, we should talk about this. That probably wouldn't be a super effective horror maze, but do we would like them for the event or not? So the first one is one that is actually heavily rumored for this year and has appeared in the past. We actually talked about it in this episode already, Ghostbusters. So a Ghostbusters maze at Horror Nights, do you expect that to be scary? And if not, what does it bring to the table that you're going to enjoy?
I think it's going to be a bit of scariness with a bit of camp/goofiness. Because the original Ghostbuster is a comedy.
It is. It's very funny.
So
it's a comedy that I think actually really holds up today. It's a very different style of comedy.
Yeah.
From the 80s, it's less, you're going to laugh out loud at every single line. And it's a little more subtle. Where, I mean, one thing that really sticks with me, that's just, it's almost underwritten. Where they're eating Chinese food in the firehouse, and Bill Murray wants to take Sigourney Weaver out on a date, and he's like, oh, I need some petty cash to take her out. And I think Egon tells him, oh, this represents the last of the petty cash. And then he looks at Dan Aykroyd, he's just chatting with the Chinese food. He's like, "Stop, Ray. Choose your food."
Yeah.
And it's such a funny, silly little line. And what makes Ghostbusters great is the characters. And that's what I want to see in a Ghostbusters maze, because I am someone who has that connection to those original movies. And what makes those movies great is the characters. So I want to see, I remember what really sticks with me with the last Ghostbusters maze is a part where a Bill Murray actor comes out. He says, "We came, we saw, we kicked its ass."
Yeah.
And I want to see more stuff like that, where you're seeing these moments from the movie with the characters you love recreated in a way that you can be a little bit more of a participant.
I definitely would love to see the library scene where the ghost librarian, as a book nerd myself, that was always my biggest concern about going to old libraries. So something like that, where it's not necessarily scary, but it's still like a good camp. And if it's hilarious, like what was the mascot that they Slimer, yes. So they have Slimer on the scenes. Like, I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun. If Slimer gets to get a good scare on me every once in a while, even better.
I think another element that a Ghostbusters maze can bring to the table is some very interesting original designs. Because a lot of the ghosts in Ghostbusters don't look like the classic kind of very human-like ghost or just the sheet with two eyes. There was a lot of really fun designs. I would love to see the Horror Night creative team come up with their own spin on ghosts in that kind of design realm, and that would be very fun to see as you go through.
The Slimer actually reminded me of one of the ghost uncles in Casper.
I don't know which came first.
They're very similar.
They're contemporaneous.
Yeah. So the idea is...
You can also see some fun effects in a Ghostbusters maze that might not suit other mazes. What I don't think I've ever seen at Horror Nights that I really keep waiting for them to do is a good Pepper's Ghost effect.
Ooh,
like at
Pepper's
Haunted Mansion
yeah.
at Disneyland. I think that is something that's very underutilized in the whole thing, because it looks so good in the Haunted Mansion. And I know might not be as easy to install in one of these tents. I might have to go on the soundstage. But I would love to see that in a maze, just because I love that effect. One day we're going to talk about the Haunted Mansion on this podcast. Not today.
Not today.
Disney will never allow that maze to be created.
What have we learned from Justin Bieber? Never say never.
When it comes to Disney releasing their iron grip on IP, I think we can say never.
Oh, yes. Mickey is never joining the public domain.
No. So that's one that we've seen and we may see again. Another one I saw online that sparked a really actually kind of a nasty debate going back and forth over whether or not this is scary enough. Is this horror? Can it come to the event? Is Fallout. Of course, that's what we themed our episode about, because the TV show, by the time we recorded this will be released a few weeks after, but the TV show is still pretty hot right now. And we're big Fallout fans ourselves, so we thought that would be fun. So, would you like to see Fallout at Horror Nights?
I'm a huge Apocalypse fan. I am a huge Last of Us. So, I would love to see it. The idea of... Now, this, again, would go into the idea of full-on immersion.
Yeah.
It does not necessarily have to be jump scares, but the fact that you're full on immersed in the story of this is the apocalypse, this is what's happened after the nuclear blast. I'm into it. I dig it.
I think because Fallout has been in game before as a show, there would be a lot of ways to draw you into that world, where you could use some of the sounds, you can use the music from those games is very iconic. Mm-hmm. You have these games all have like radio stations playing, so you could have the radio station playing in the background the whole time you go through. And I do think there are actually a lot of strong horror elements in Fallout that are kind of seen in the background. You have the ghouls, or basically nuclear zombies. That's a pretty easy scare to set up. You're going through an old bombed out city. You could set it in Hollywood. It would be a fun original concept. Maybe the concept is you start and the facade is a vault that's just been opened.
Yeah.
And you're going to exit the vault, and now you're stepping into the Hollywood wasteland. You see what's become the Universal backlot in the post-apocalyptic Fallout universe. It would be great. And you would have ghouls attacking you on movie sets, and you can imagine the super mutants, big hulking monsters, pretty easy scare to set. You could do a still walker for that. You could have maybe a robot who's a Brotherhood of Steel guy in power armor coming after you. So I feel like you could mix a lot of horror into a Fallout maze to make it an effective Horror Nights experience.
I would laugh / be awesomely amazed if they made the facade of the Back to the Future square.
That would be funny.
That would be like a great way to
But
really
all
combine it.
Fallout.
Yes,
Yeah.
all Fallout, but it's the square. You know it's the square. You see Marty McFly dead or something.
No, that's too much. That's too much.
You know, it'll be hilarious if you see Doc Brown coming into the future and going, nope.
Turn right around. Get it back up to 88.
Oh, man.
You wouldn't have trouble finding nuclear fuel for the DeLorean, at least.
No, there'd be nuclear particles all over the place for him to quickly grab, and a lot of trash to put in his compactor.
So one thing I would say I would want to see them avoid in this potential Fallout maze, I could critique The Last of Us maze for this as well, is the kind of the generic post-apocalyptic human raider enemy you see in all these games. I don't find that to be an effective scare. I don't really want to see that in a maze. And it's a big part of the Fallout games and the show, of course, but I would just sidestep that. Make it focus on the ghouls, focus on the giant guys in the power armor, there's a lot of monsters in Fallout. There's the Death Claw is iconic, this giant kind of hulking monster. Focus on the super mutants, focus on things that aren't just normal people.
Oh, I see. So you don't want to be focused on you're the character kind of spiel. You want to quickly get to the monster portion of it.
I just think when you're trying to do a jump scare, if you're going, like, it's kind of back to what I was talking about, a maze that's trying to be scary and fails, that's when a maze needs to be scary. So if you're trying to have jump scares, make sure the jump scares are scary. And I do not find just this generic human raider character scary. So stick with the monsters. Because it's a world that has monsters you can use. So use them.
And there's a lot of them, too.
There's a good variety. And you could have fun doing ghouls. Because they were people at one point. So it could be, here's like the sound guy. And he has a boom mic or something. I mean, they could have some fun with it.
Yeah, definitely. Especially
but it would definitely be a
Hollywood
campy maze. Fallout always has that core element, but the camp is stronger.
I would love it if they fully went Fallout camp. That would definitely be it. And if you definitely saw characters of like Universal execs for Hollywood Horror Nights, that would be even funnier.
We got a little bit of time left. Can you think of a third franchise that we could talk about to close out?
That could potentially bring into Horror Nights?
That is maybe in the non-horror franchise that you would like to see, or you think could be a good translation?
I can't think of anything else.
I'll throw one out then. I'll say it's one that is kind of at Horror Nights now. Do you think there could be an effective Harry Potter Death Eaters maze as a full maze, not just as a little scare zone?
Okay, so this would be interesting. Because I could definitely see... No. Not as if they focused on one book in particular, but if they focused on the entire series and just chose spots to really focus on.
I could see that. I would say you would do kind of an original maze. And you would say, if you have to have a story, maybe it's after the battle, and now there's kind of the remnants of the Death Eater still around, and you're just going to get a tour. I wouldn't just make it like the Harry Potter ride, that the story is nonsense. It's just an excuse to go to these areas.
Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of areas in the Harry Potter world that have kind of a horror theme. You can think of the Forbidden Forest.
Exactly.
You can think of the Chamber of Secrets.
No, that's what I mean. Don't focus on one particular book.
Don't get too set in one place.
Yes, focus on the whole series. Like if we talk from book one, what was scary about book one? The fact that he had to go through the trials and then the Voldemort and Professor Quirrell attacked him at the end. What was scary about book two? Book two was the actual Chamber of Secrets. So there was a giant snake.
The giant snake would be cool to see.
Not only that, but the giant spider.
Yeah, that's on the ride though.
That's on the ride, yes. But if you went through a full-on dark forest, what they've done in other places, that's also scary. Book three, you could be even if a hippogriff scares you.
The mysterious creatures.
Yeah, mysterious creatures all over the place. Something like that. And book four has a freaking dragon. Like, there's different elements of all the book in the series, and at the end, it could the climax could be you're facing off with Voldemort, like something like that. It doesn't, and throughout it is the Death Eaters. It's peppered in with the jump scares. It could be either the Death Eaters, or it could be other characters as they're trying to tell you relevant information of what's coming up next in a way.
Now, if I can get into some Horror Nights lore for a moment, I tweeted about this. There was an event, I think it was in like it was either in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the way Horror Nights used to work when it was just Orlando was they wouldn't ask for permission to use IPs. They would just use them. And that worked for a long time. And of course, in the Orlando park, they have Marvel Land. This was before Marvel was owned by Disney. And they had a maximum carnage zone. And they had a maximum carnage. Man, Carnage is a Spider-Man enemy. In the comic books, he was a serial killer who gets possessed by this alien thing. And he kind of rampages. So he's kind of like the Joker, but he fights Spider-Man if you know comic books. And in the maze for a long time, there were these rumors that... Because it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, there were no cell phones. There was no walkthrough video of this maze. And the rumor for a long time was that they had... Because in Horror Nights, of course, there's always these gore effects of these dead bodies. The rumor was that they had superheroes like Spider-Man and Captain America, but they were dead in the maze. And it had a nasty gore effect. And Marvel saw this and got so angry, they told them, if you ever use Marvel in Horror Nights again, you will lose Marvel for everything in your whole theme park. And that was a rumor for a long time. It was a bit of an urban legend because no one could find video to debunk or prove it. And recently, an account that investigates theme park mysteries on Twitter investigated this and determined it was not true. They found a documentary that had a pretty complete walkthrough, and they talked to several people who worked at the maze, and all of them said that's not true. There were no dead heroes in the maze. But there were Marvel villains as scare actors. So there is some precedent for taking something that is a mega IP like Marvel or Harry Potter and turning it into a maze, even though it's not horror focused. I will say for Harry Potter, one obstacle would be the Death Eaters all are a little samey. And I know we've critiqued mazes before for having the same monster. Even the Voldemort and the Death Eaters and some Dementors, even Dementors and Death Eaters look very similar.
They look very similar.
So
but
you might run out of creatures.
However, what we did like about Stranger Things is that sometimes it wasn't the monsters that scare you. Sometimes it was the characters themselves just popping out and saying their lines. It kind of took you out for a minute.
But again, I don't know if J.K. Rowling would be comfortable having Harry Potter, the character Harry. I think she might be getting more open because she's been allowing them to use the Death Eaters at Horror Nights now. So you may be edging towards a world where she could conceive of a Death Eater maze. I don't know if she would say, yes, throw Ron and Harry and Hermione in there as well, if it's a harrowing, actually scary environment. Because if Harry and Ron are just there to help you and they guide you through safely, I think that diminishes the fear. But again, is that as important, or do we just want to be immersed in the Death Eater attack world?
I would say if they got Emma Watson, Rupert Grint,
to do the lines,
and Daniel Radcliffe to be doing all these lines, I would be the first one in that maze.
You know, they're opening Universal Park in England. They're looking into it, and it's pretty. They're not quite sure when, but it's going to happen. Maybe when they do Horror Nights there, that will be the headliner. It'll be go to London, and now you can experience the Harry Potter Horror Nights only in Europe.
You know what? I will book my flight.
You would.
The moment that is released is the moment my flight is booked.
So I guess the Halloween horror nerds will have to go out to the UK to experience that maze.
The Hollywood Horror Nerds goes worldwide.
Hollywood Horror Nerds goes UK. That'll be a fun episode.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know if that's something that would ever happen, but I think I would like to see a little more. It feels like we're getting a little more Harry Potter in the event because we have that big Hogsmeade area. I think the more, and that fun, witchy, it is a Halloween vibe in those Harry Potter movies. They always get pushed during the Halloween season. I think a little more wouldn't hurt. I'd like to see it.
I'm excited.
But I do not think it would be scary.
No.
But I think I could tolerate that.
It's Harry Potter.
Yes. If it's a good immersive world, we'll let it slide.
Dude, I am so down for a Harry Potter world.
Now I feel like you're going to be disappointed that this is not going to happen anytime in the future. I feel like I've seeded something. I know some of our audience will be excited as well.
You've opened up a can of worms. I hope you realize that. J.K. Rowling, if you are a listener, or if someone who knows J.K. Rowling could tweet this to her.
I also know like the Horror Nights purists who would come out the very opposite end of this debate from where we seem to have ended up and would say it has to be a horror property, it has to be scary. They would be livid. They would be livid at a Harry Potter maze headlining the event.
Well, the ending of the Harry Potter maze could be a J.K. Rowling character with litigation papers.
J.K. Rowling herself would show up and say, this was an unauthorized use of my intellectual property. I will see you in court.
And just hands them to you.
Yeah. All right, I think that's about all we got time for. Thank you for joining us in this spirited fireside debate.
And if you have your own comments about what we just talked about, you can always reach out to us on our email at hollywoodhorrornotes@gmail.com.
Which we now say in the regular show because we were told we weren't offering it It's in the outro, people. Listen to the very end.
Don't just
We re-record those outros every time. They're not one stock outro.
No.
We put ourselves through the ringer on this show for you people.
And you can always reach through us through Instagram and X.
Okay, let's save the outro for the outro. For now, we'll say good night and good luck.
Stay scared out there. Thank you for listening to this production of the Hollywood Horror Nerds. We know you have many options for your listening entertainment, and we're glad you chose us. Find us on Instagram at Hollywood Horror Nerds, on X at HW Horror Nerds, and on YouTube at Hollywood Horror Nerds. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite alternative podcast site to ensure you don't miss next month's episode. And until then, stay scared out there.